Okay, folks. All right, this next seminar is Cannabis, or Health, Happiness, and Creativity. Which I'm all three of the above, so there's no reason for me to stay and listen. I'm just high, really high. I'm going to dab right before I came over here. This is all really exciting. So anyway, on that note, let's have a happy seminar. Your lead seminarist is Debbie Goldsberry, who I've known for over 20 years when she was just a young thing, doing her cannabis activism. She's a legend in our movement. So everybody, Debbie Goldsberry.
That was hilarious. Okay, I hope everybody else has had a dab and a couple of hits off a bong. I don't know, so at the same level here, but anyway, yes, my name's Debbie, and I'm with the Magnolia Wellness Collective. We have a booth out there, and I'm really excited to be with Magnolia Wellness because we're focused on well, not really the old-fashioned values, but the values that Dennis Perone promoted in his original club, getting medicine to the most patients who need it the most, making sure that it's affordable, making sure you have a gigantic selection, making sure it's interesting, fun. So I'm happy to be here representing Magnolia. But for the booth, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking like the things that I'm really interested in. Well, I got some stuff down. I'll tell you what, the first time I tried cannabis, it changed my life. Did that happen to anybody the very first time they tried cannabis? Yeah! The very first time. Why was it? Something switched in my head. I was happier. I was more chatty. My social network expanded. You know, I got more crafty. I started putting up the black lights. You know, all this stuff happened because something in my head changed even on day one that really benefited me. So I recognized in the height of the drug war back in the mid-'80s that something that instantly improved my life could not be the thing that the DEA and our government was telling us. So I became involved instantly. So a lot of you probably, when you had that moment, also got involved in that moment. If not, you know, getting involved by making sure you had cannabis, you could, you know, continue to experience that very helpful feeling. So right about the same time, I found a government document called Correlations and Consequences of Cannabis Use. And it was an accumulation of studies. You probably have it in the archives, the Aldriches, somewhere. And in that study, again and again, the study said people who use cannabis are more creative. And they're more against the government. So I thought, of course they want to squash that stuff out, right? You know, they don't want us to be creative. And their own prohibition makes us anti-government. But what I wanted to do today is explore that basic idea. How does cannabis inspire our creativity? What is it that sparks us to become so passionate for the cause? And then at my time at Berkeley Patients Group, because I'm a long-time cannabis advocate on medical cannabis, I directed Berkeley Patients Group for about 11 years. Somewhere along the line, we did a sociological study, and we found that 65% of our members were dually diagnosed with a mental health condition. That's a lot of people, right? And if they had the cannabis, their use of alcohol, drugs of abuse, and their use of prescription medications really went down. So there was a very clear correlative effect between access to safe cannabis and in helping these conditions that are very serious, from PTSD to any kind of mental health condition you can imagine. And so I've been really inspired by that. So this panel is to discuss these ideas. And so I've invited a poet, publisher, Diane Fornbacher from Colorado. She can tell her story. I've invited a scientist because it's not just made up, there's science behind all of this, how cannabis operates with your endocannabinoid system and how it does inspire these kinds of things in people. And I brought an author who's in a writing group with me. We formed, well, we gotta meet again, Writers Who Toke. Because, you know, when we write, we're inspired to write our books and stuff like that. So I've invited Jeremy, who's a prolific writer and author and a publisher and a pretty smart guy himself, to discuss these issues. So I want to turn it over to Diane Fornbacher. You can tell us more about yourself and tell us what you know, anything you want.
I like miniature toys and rock collecting. Thank you. I really came to know cannabis as a refuge from pharmaceutical drugs for depression. And when I took medications for depression, I noticed things would happen to me that didn't happen before. Like my hair would fall out. You know, you could gain 70 pounds in like 2 months. That's really bad. And I was introduced to cannabis as an alternative by a girl who lived down the hall from me in college. And up until that point, having dealt with a rather tumultuous childhood, which some people can relate to, one finds it hard when you become an adult to sort of find your way and heal at the same time. And that's why I was on pharmaceuticals for depression. But in addition to some of the physical symptoms that pharmaceutical drugs had on me, I started having different thought patterns, which I think is the intention of taking them and having them prescribed, but they were undesirable effects that did not help me process and deal with practical day-to-day life, right? So at one point, I sort of hit rock bottom, and I didn't want to take the medications. They weren't working as directed, and they definitely weren't working for me for the future. And I just, kind of cut them down and cut them off. A friend suggested that I smoke cannabis, but early in my life, I had experimented with it with my cousins. I think maybe it was way too strong, or I don't know, or I wasn't developmentally ready at that juncture. But I wasn't really into cannabis, and it's kind of ironic because almost 20 years later, I do, panels about cannabis and passion for it. So it's not something I planned for. But throughout my life, because of my cannabis use, the drug war did nothing but land itself at my feet. And I combined the ability to write with activism, but also communicate through poetry, which at times is much easier than writing paragraphs. You stop, you want to edit, but I find poetry to be a freer form. So in that, I actually found poetry before I found pot, but both of them combined really help sort of quell the distractions of this world. Indeed, if I had not been challenged by any kind of mental illness, I also would have experienced, this very loud world, this very fast-paced sort of society in which we live. So with cannabis, I find my poetry is amplified. It doesn't make me a poet, but it makes me able to process a lot more creatively through my poetry and process some of the experiences of my life that I need to process as well. So for happiness and health and creativity, I really believe that the cannabis is a sacrament for which I am entirely grateful, and I'm proud to sort of bring the word around the country about what it means to free people from, yes, mental slavery, what it means to have this world sometimes be too quick-paced and not exactly value those of us who might be, naturally a little introverted or trying to make our way in this world. So cannabis has exponentially helped me develop as a human being. I think Joe Rogan said that when he uses cannabis before he writes, it's like a symphony. It's sort of like everything comes together perfectly on many different levels. It touches the soul and it's intellectual. And I'm really grateful for cannabis for that. So I'd also like to share a poem with you, if I could, please. This is regarding the paradigm shift in which we find ourselves. Right now, a lot of people have been activists for years, or culturalists, and work together to do these fundraisers, or perform, or do voter registration. My favorite. It's cool because you get to talk to people. Sometimes you get both thirsty and you're there for a long time. But anyway, the paradigm shift is about how we're all unifying together. I believe pot's always been mainstream. It just took the mainstream a while to catch up to the drug war and the atrocities of it. Should make it less possible to ban cannabis. But I digress. This poem is called Paradigm Shift. Of course, the internet connection is very slow, but this paradigm shift, after all the battles of field, have come to this new time. Activists into entrepreneurs, others new to the game. Some no concern for the battle, only cash in hand. We're all mixed in together. Suits, khakis, ties, button down, tie-dye, jeans, sandals, blazers, sensible dresses, patent leather shoes and tomato farmers, cannabis farmers, large-scale grow-ops, closet medicine, laboratory coats and plenary sessions, safety meetings, classing up the joint mainstreaming, many worlds colliding, shell shock for some, new world for others, comrades raging, partners pairing, investment making, soldiers fighting. Moving forward, laws jumbled, piecemeal, doctors restricted, politicians playing physician, patients languishing, civil liberty mess. Yet moving along, a reasonable pace here, unreasonable pace there. All over willy-nilly, a noble dream. Some say it's an American one, but I believe it is a human one. Cannabis, the great keystone. Broken open, the rest of the arches breaking down. For new structure, this drug war will end across our great and shared timeline. So I publish Ladybud magazine online. It's Ladybud with a D. Usually when you talk to mainstream media, they say Ladybug, and autocorrect does it frequently too. That's what their kids read. Ladybud's what their parents should read. So I hope you'll visit. Okay.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Cannabis for productivity is a really interesting thing. I met our next speaker recently at Magnolia Wellness Collective in Oakland, where I work, because we did a science training with Steve Hill Hayland Lab, where he was one of the chief scientists over there, to educate the staff and the people who work with the patients about the cannabinoid system, about which cannabises might work for different different conditions. When people have symptoms, so we want to try and match their symptoms to the cannabis that works the best. So we had the good Dr. Reverend Cameron de Cesare come into the place and give a lecture. And then I was thinking about you just the other day, because I'm actually an indica judge this time around for High Times, so it was 44 indicas. I had to smoke them very quickly. And I found it fascinating because the first 9 indicas, I couldn't even believe it. Are you kidding me? This is like inhumane. That's what I just couldn't even make it through. And so I took a breather, and then I went back and I just powered through the next 20. And then I think, okay, that was a challenge. But after that, I think that I reached a saturation point with my endocannabinoid receptors, because after that, every cannabis that I tried was dedicated to 3 hits of each cannabis. So I calculated, it was like the 100 bottles of beer on the wall, and I had to count it down, like 20 samples left, something I had to take the number of hits. Each time I could feel a nice feeling from each bud without getting over cannabinoided. I don't even know, there's science behind all this stuff. But I was thinking of you because of, you were teaching us at Magnolia Wellness about cannabinoid receptor flooding. When you flood your cannabinoid receptors, you can no longer get that same medical cannabis benefit that you might be needing. Anyway, when we were planning this panel, I wanted to bring in a scientist to let you know it's not just creativity that's happening, it's an actual scientific process, and it's not just stress release or relief you're getting from PTSD or something like that. There's something that's actually happening with the medicine in your body, and I'm hoping you'll tell us more about yourself as well.
Can everybody hear me okay? No. Gotta use the mic. Everybody hear me fine now? I guess you do. My name is Reverend Dr. Cameron D. Caesar. I'm Chief Research Officer at Steve Hill Hayland. I've been an herbalist, healer, chemist, and ordained minister of the Taoist faith for 40 years. I do a lot of the education and teaching for Steve Hill Hayland for folks like Magnolia and others. That basically comes from the fact that I just retired after 33 years of teaching laboratory chemistry at UC Davis. So if I talk to you as if this is a class, I hope you don't mind. That's kind of what I'm used to doing. The cannabis plant is not magical. I know a lot of our activists say that. They're not doing us many favors when they do. Okay? It's not magical. What it is it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's acting as a terpenoid-containing plant. And you know a lot of terpenoid-containing plants. And they all have very similar properties in what they do. I've been myself doing extractions on terpenoid plants for almost 50 years. And the ones, a lot of them you may think of, you've heard of chamomile. chamomile goes toe-to-toe with cannabis in most areas of where you would treat a person, what you would use it for. It's about the same strain. A lot of terpenoid plants are that way. Another thing that's interesting about them is the fact that with terpenoid medicinal remedies, they usually have very high LD50s. That means they're not very toxic. You'd have to eat between 90 grams to 500 grams of a terpenoidal chemical to have a 50% chance of dropping dead. It would take that much. Now, we all know that by the time you get through that first gram of THC, you're probably taking a nap for the next 24 to 36 hours. And so, you know, if you're trying to commit suicide with it, wrong choice. Besides, if you smoke cannabis, you probably aren't going to be, you know, any desire for suicide is probably going to be a lot less. I can discuss that in a moment. So, cannabis clearly is relatively safe compared to most of the drugs that are used allopathically, the pharmaceutical drugs that we use today. They have very high LD50s. They generally have very low rates of folks who are allergic to them or have intolerances to them, which again is why nobody dies from cannabis and nobody gets too terribly sick, unless they've eaten too many edibles, of course. It's another story. So you have all these terpenoids, including the cannabinoids, which are terpenoids, and other terpenes and things in the plant. We know that the cannabis plant has over 100 cannabinoids, plant cannabinoids in it, plus probably close to 50 possible different terpenes. And for all these materials in there, it just varies strain to strain in terms of what's in it. This generally tells us that different strains may be more useful for treating different ailments. And the way these ailments are treated is that the chemical compounds in the plant work in two receptors that you're all probably heard of, CB1 in the brain and CB2 throughout your body. Truth of the matter is that cannabinoids, like other terpenoids, play in a vast array of receptors. The fact that we see beta-caryophyllene, something that you find in cracked black pepper or in Thai basil, and it plays in the CB2 receptor, actually making it easier for CBD cannabidiol to get in there. Okay? That's not so surprising. So is it such a surprise if we find that some cannabinoids also play in receptors that we think only caryophyllene can go into, right? Examples of what we can do with it. I brought an example. There's not really much I can show you here. This thing's filled with keef. This currently is probably some of the rarest keef on the planet. I'm not exaggerating. The reason is that this keef came from a new strain that's only been around for about 2 years, which is only half THC. The other half is THCV, tetracannabinohydrofuran, a slightly different form of THC. And what makes it so unique is the fact that it's a 50-50 mix. Normally, if you want a high THCV plant, we use a South African sativa. We get it from Africa, and it has at most maybe 0.5%, but certainly not the large amount you have in here. And what all the massive number of Israeli researchers that have worked on this for a long time will tell you is, if you have post-traumatic stress, this is what you want. And the reason is that what THCV does, which is very unique, is it switches off the flight-fight effect in the brain. It will not let you panic. You can be angry, you can be crying, you can be happy, you just can't freak out. Okay? Now, why would Israel be interested in something like that? Why would they have spent all the money they have? Well, something that we're not used to in the United States is PTSD. And in Israel, 60 to 65% of the entire civilian population has PTSD. Every man, woman, and child, 65% of them. Reason is that when you go to bed at night, one thing that's on your mind is, when I go to work in the morning, will there be a bus across the street that blows up and kills me or a member of my family? Okay? So, if the Israelis have invested the millions of dollars they have into THCV, it's got to be very, very important. THCV is good for a couple other interesting things. It's good for Parkinson's, where CBD doesn't work. Okay? It's probably good for Lou Gehrig's disease, since that's very similar to Parkinson's and how it works. One interesting side effect of it is it's more energetic, much more energetic than any sativa. It dulls your appetite down to nothing. That's a problem for some people if you're trying to stimulate appetite. For people who want to go on a diet, it's exactly what you want. And it's more psychoactive than THC. which people find unusual. Now, on the other hand, you have plants like AC/DC that are high CBD plants. These don't get you high at all because out of the 100 plus cannabinoids we know of that the plant makes, there's only about half a dozen, maybe 6 that even have psychoactivity to any degree at all. So here's CBD. It's one of the most well-established medicinal cannabinoids out there. I won't go through the long list of things it can do, but I'll tell you one thing I've seen over and over again. You take a child, like a patient that is a 3-year-old who has Dravet syndrome. It's a type of epilepsy that does not respond to drugs at all, or hardly at all. And he's having 50 grand mal seizures each and every day. That means that on that day, his brain is basically unconscious the entire day. You put him on CBD, you can take him off all the other medications he's on, and these are medications that do mental damage over time. And so you get him off those medications, you put him on CBD, and if you find the right dosage, in less than a week, he's down to 0 seizures a day. Now, he's down to 0 seizures with a relatively non-toxic chemical that you're pumping into the bloodstream of a 3-year-old, okay, as opposed to other things that are out there. I personally find that remarkable because in the old days, at least when I was in the Hospital Corps, U.S. Navy, and we had a child, we had to put him on Delanton. I knew that I was going to watch that child mentally slip over time, and there was nothing we could do about it. But the choice was let him mentally slip or keep him alive. I'm very thankful that we have choices now where we don't have to make those kind of choices. That improves my quality of life, to be honest with you as a dealer. We have an example of a high THC plant that's good for ADHD. Anybody here have ADHD problems? You're here, you're there, you're looking for the squirrel, everything. Well, turns out that Super Silver Haze has almost entirely just THCA in it, which will convert to THC. This makes it an energetic sativa, so you're not groggy, it's energetic. But more importantly, what's in there with it are 2 terpenes, limonene and terpenoline. And when you bring those together, and those work proactively on the THC to change the high in CB1, what happens to the ADHD is first they're energetic. The next thing you notice is they're very clear-headed. It's not a goofy, groggy, daisy high like in Blue Dream. Very clear-headed. And the ADHD type of effect, where they're looking around, having trouble focus, is converted into a type of OCD that's extremely project-oriented. When a person smokes Super Silver Haze, anybody's done that, you know, you're not going to sit there and play a jigsaw puzzle. You're out there painting the house, or you're running a triathlon, but you're not doing a jigsaw puzzle. You're not playing video games. You want to get busy. And so here's an example where we have a high THC plant, Super Silver Haze, and its genetic sister, Jack Hare, okay? And we give this to an ADHD, and suddenly they can study for that exam they need in college. That's pretty remarkable, right? And so there's just a few examples of what it does. I don't want to take up too much more time, so what I want to say is I will point out one thing that I don't ever hear people talking about cannabis. Cannabis is non-violent. It has a non-violent effect on our brain. Synergistically, it has all the other synergies that go with that non-violence. It tends to be social. You don't hoard that joint. You want to bring people in and share it with them. And then you want to share the laughing. You want to share the talking that goes with it. Now, these things are all synergistic. Violence is not synergistic towards being social, right? And so here we have this drug that our own government for decades has villainized. And yet, if you look at all these apocalyptic movies about the future where everybody's on this drug to keep them calm and keep them in lockstep, to some extent, I got to be honest with you, it sounds like that was probably cannabis because, you know, people want to participate as a group at that time. They don't want to be violent. You know, so it's funny to me how our government misses that.
This is really interesting stuff. One thing we learned at Berkeley Patients Group when we did that sociological study, we looked at our members and we found out 65% of people were dually diagnosed with mental health illnesses. We realized that in the last 10 years, when people had access to safe medical cannabis through the dispensary or through a caregiver, that they didn't move on to drug addiction, and they didn't move on to pharmaceutical drugs, and they didn't move on to alcohol addiction. And so people who were in the 28 and under age bracket, I mean, had just naturally had self-medicated with cannabis. One thing I learned is that if you're short, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, if your endocannabinoid system isn't, if your receptors aren't full of your natural endocannabinoid, you're gonna crave something to go land there. So you're gonna maybe crave alcohol, you might crave hard drugs, you might crave excitement in some way. But if you have access to cannabis and it lands there, you might not even know what's happening, because we have a whole generation of people who aren't moving on to drug addictions and to alcohol and to these very major problems. So amazing to me to find that happening. So no wonder people love marijuana so much, it's amazing. We have our final panelist made it, Courtney Sheets. She's a blogger, she's a PTSD expert, a peer counselor. She was with Americans for Safe Access for a number of years. So I'll ask Jeremy to give your speech first, and Courtney, you can bring it home, for the home run. So Jeremy is my buddy from Oakland, and he's an author, a publisher with the West Coast Leaf. Is that thing working? We don't know. And he's working on a book. Test.
Just trying to get.
It's working. Jeremy, just take it away.
Yeah, Debbie, you're really going to hear from me on this. Having to follow an act like that, I mean, just like we have to give it up for every young man. I mean, what a job! We have to go from like all the different chemical ways that cannabis is going to save the world in all of its multitudinous forms to talking about vampire ninjas in space. Which is the name of my novel. Yeah, we're in the Writer's Utopia, and yeah, I mean, I'm not new to writing, obviously. Everyone should also, in addition to following ladybud.com, I'm a contributor to ladybud.com, but I also got my own site, which we run with Chris Conrad and Mickey Norris, theleafonline.com, which is the West Coast Leaf Online. Everyone, should check that out, of course. But, yeah, thank you. But that credit really goes to Chris and Mickey when it comes to my creative writing. I've always wanted to tell stories, and like if this panel is about how the interaction between cannabis and productivity, creativity, I have to say that for scientific reasons, it should be noted that I was intensely creative long before I ever started using cannabis. So the fact that I write creative stories now is not necessarily indicative. Some people say it makes them more creative. Me personally, not reflecting on anyone, what cannabis does for me is this. It actually gets me more project-oriented, more productivity-oriented, and not necessarily in the way that we were hearing about before with THCA, but rather a vital part of my process is being able to switch back and forth. I have to understand my stories from the point of view of myself, the author, the omniscient narrator, but I also have to understand from the point of view of the people who are reading, and I have to be able to attain a binary consciousness in which I can switch back and forth. And so, although I just geek out reading all about how, the chemical reasons for that, all I know is through experience. For me, cannabis can be like a switch. I can switch into one mode or to another. And just to reiterate the fact that I heard earlier before, I understand, I'm also a student of writers who came before me. And one writer I admire in terms of his work product, but not at all in his productivity habits, would be Hemingway, who wrote some really great stuff under the influence of poison. But that poison took him from us. So I will say that cannabis is far more sustainable in that regard. But I guess I could talk about the novel. I was high when I first conceived of it. But I really think if I hadn't been high, I still wouldn't conceive of it, because there's nothing more awesome than ninjas, one. Second, the only thing that makes ninjas more awesome is by making them vampire ninjas. And third, everything is more awesome in space. So really, it was just a foregone conclusion that I would do that. But really, I would really have to talk about the process, because I am a very, very process-oriented writer. I have to lay all the foundation. I have to get all of the internal logic done. I've got to get all the characters fleshed out, all of the timelining up to everyone's motivations, everything, before I even start writing the first draft. And cannabis, I mean, I know so many writers who don't understand that that's your foundation. That's the basis of your story, putting all of that stuff together, creating your world. Without cannabis, I don't know whether I'd be able to do that. I would be so impatient. I'd want to just, like Virginia Woolf, just like dive into the first perfect sentence on the first try. You know, great, Virginia could do that. I'm not as good as her. You know? And then another author I admire, Norman Mailer, he said something that's very, very to the point about this. He saw an incredible amount of value also in the dualism, the binary consciousness with pot, without cannabis. Because he was friends with Allen Ginsberg, so he certainly was acquainted with the idea that it can stimulate understanding, you know, better depths of understanding, aesthetic understanding, better creative understanding. But Mailer, I actually liked his argument better than Ginsberg. He articulated we should have a period of study, of rigorous study in which we work hard, sober, and we really master our material, and we get it all written up, totally, take it seriously like it's our job, or like we're back in school, or something lame like that. And then once we've built up our lack of tolerance, then we need to come at it with some of that very powerful THCV or THCA, just like really to come at it with completely new eyes, and the way you can use your own writing as a launching pad to a completely new perspective on your own story is absolutely critical. So I would never advocate that anyone ever write a story just straight. I would never advocate anyone write a story just stone. And I would certainly advocate no one ever do the Hemingway thing and write it while drunk. That would be horrible. But if you can have the power to switch back and forth and use that in your process, use your more linear mind, your more straight world mind as a critical, perhaps, or stimulate creativity with the cannabis, or perhaps more like me, the other way around. You know, find your own groove, but see what you can do switching back and forth. That's the best advice I can give, and also write 1,000 words a day. That's vampire ninjas in space, coming soon.
When me and Jeremy are in this writing group, he was saying writers who toke, so we're kind of getting it together, I guess. You know, we've had a couple meetings, it's super fun. So I'm doing a kind of a satirical 12-step book on relationship recovery, where your friends 5150, you know, they 5150 you before you run up the credit card bills, send 100 text messages, and who knows what else happens. Anyway, it's funny, it's so fun. But what I wanted to also say is, you know, I was testing those cannabis indicas, 44 indicas, and I said I hit a plateau at 20, but it was a productivity plateau that also at that point, because at that point I said, look, 20 indicas, you've got 24 to go, you're in front of your computer anyway, get to work. And I addressed my business plan, I reviewed a number of pages of finances, I got the business plan out to the funders, I got an NDA signed, you know, I got an NDA returned, all this stuff happened. So I realized also, I guess, if you're going to smoke indicas for productivity, it has to be 20 indicas and above, and that's when it kicks in, get the job done. But anyway, the final panelist, Courtney, is a longtime cannabis advocate, Americans for Safe Access, peer counselor, very nice person, and a vlogger. So take it away.
Everybody, thank you so much to my fellow panelists. It's good to see everybody today, so thank you so much for coming out. My name is Courtney Sheets, and I'm an activist in California, as well as I work on policies nationwide. And it started off that I became a medical cannabis patient with a childhood PTSD diagnosis, and I very quickly learned that the rights that we had as medical cannabis patients were very short, and they were even shorter when it came to our rights under federal law. We had no rights to transport or to go to different states and use our medicine and obtain our medicine, so I became an activist. And in that process, life itself found that I experienced a drive-by shooting where 2 of my girlfriends were shot, and I experienced a home invasion robbery. Both of these happened within a year and a half of each Thankfully, I had already been in treatment called dialectical behavioral therapy, or it's called DBT. And it's a therapy that incorporates Buddhist philosophy as well as cognitive behavior techniques to allow you to use tools to regulate your emotions, manage crisis, and to change your mind and turn your mind if it starts to cycle in a negative process. So with regards to using medical cannabis for creative, in order to let the creativity flow, when I was in crisis, the doctors immediately wanted to put me on antidepressants, and of course they wanted to also put me on anti-anxiety medicine, which was up to 3 to 4 milligrams of Xanax a day in order just to sleep. Without the Xanax, I was waking up in a panic at 6 a.m. every morning, clutching my heart. So I really reached out to my medical cannabis network and asked them what they were experiencing with the strains and with the method deliveries and how I could really start to use medical cannabis in order to change my mind and not have me cycling into crisis and depression and full-blown anxiety attacks. So what I had found was the high levels of indica at night allowed me to fall asleep and stay asleep. And in taking cannabis, that method was actually quicker than using Xanax. Xanax would sometimes take 20 minutes or up to 30 minutes in order to provide me relief. And even then, sometimes I wasn't staying asleep throughout the night, and then I very quickly developed a tolerance to it. Now with medical cannabis, one of the great advantages of medical cannabis is that you can incorporate different strains and you can use different kinds of medical cannabis so that you don't develop a tolerance to it, and so that that method is always working for you. As Debbie said, I do vlogging, so that means that I'm often in front of the camera, and I've actually had experiences of giving interviews on television, and I've given interviews for magazines and newspapers. And for someone like me that has a very, very high social anxiety, it can be very trying. And when I was at the very early time after the traumatic experiences, I was actually housebound. I was working from my computer, but I was too scared to go out because I had experienced a drive-by shooting, and I was pretty scared to stay inside my house because I had experienced a home invasion robbery. So I was in a really difficult situation, and of course I was creatively blocked. With my writing, with my art, and with my music, I was just not able to overcome that mental hurdle. So what I did was I went back to my DBT skills, went back to my DBT support groups that assisted me in tools to help us change the mind. And one of the biggest things I've learned is that our bodies start to give us warning signals before mentally we're in a crisis. Our heart may raise, heart rate may raise, maybe we burp or hiccup, maybe we start to fixate on a very specific thought. And the nice thing about medical cannabis incorporated with DBT was that it gave me the time to get to learn what these signals are that our body is telling us, or what my body was telling me, and to catch my mind before I was in full-blown crisis or in a full-blown panic attack. So when I would sense that maybe my heart was racing, maybe I had 2 or 3 days where I wasn't able to leave the house, maybe I was quick to anger or quick to be anxious over a situation before me with work, then my skills told me, okay, your mind is starting to drift into the negative, so let's use our tools in order to turn our mind back. And that's the great thing about medical cannabis, is that it's an instant relief. It's instantly therapeutic. It provides us that mental break in order for us to catch our thoughts and start to turn them into what is factual. It's to separate the emotional statements from the factual statements and become healthy in our minds so that we can have very good creativity flow.
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone. That was great. One question, and we can take any questions if you guys have anything. When we did that training over at Magnolia, and you came in, you were talking about myrcene, this terpene that I hadn't really heard of before. And it kind of blew my mind because basically what he was saying in the training is what we've been thinking is indica and sativa is probably more likely hybrid and high myrcene and low myrcene. Can you address that?
So, way back when there were maybe 50 land raisins of indicas and sativas and man hadn't dinged with them, you could pretty much count on the fact that if you smoked a sativa, it had the normal THC effect, which is that it was very energetic. And when you smoked an indica, it had what we call the couch lock or sedative effect. There have been a lot of theories of why that was. Most of them are wrong, including the theory about CBD. It turns out that when you analyze all these plants, if you have a plant that is couch locked, it's because it has a large amount of myrcene. That myrcene, when it reaches 0.5% or more in the flowers, it becomes couch locky. So what it does is it takes the energetic effect of sativa, it manipulates it in such a way as to make it sedative instead. So regardless of whether something says sativa or indica, it's not a good indication of whether it's energetic or couch locky. The only question is does it have a lot of myrcene? If you take the classic example, OG Kush, it's somewhere between 1.25% and 1.5% myrcene in there. Now you've all seen this before. If you had a reasonably good hoppy beer of good quality, it's unfiltered, hops has a massive amount of myrcene in it. That's where I get the myrcene that I use medicinally, is from hops essential oil. And you know, so what happens when you have a couple good hoppy beers, you're ready for a nap a little while later. If not, you're ready to sit down and just calmly watch the day. And that's the effect of myrcene. Where you add THC on top of that myrcene, then you take what's a very relaxed feeling, and now you turn that into something even more exaggerated in the form of the couch lock.
And another interesting thing that you were saying, and it's something that, because we're peer counselors with the patients at Magnolia, low THC is good. It's good for nausea. High THC makes you feel nauseated. So these are things that I think that we are learning more and more about, and it's extremely important. Anybody want to ask any of the panelists a question? We definitely have time. So there's two people over there with the hat, and then right behind.
Thank you. Thank you all for a great panel. Given the difficulty of acceptance of mental health issues in mainstream society and mainstream medicine, how do we get out the message that medical marijuana also can have this impact on probably this huge swath of society that most of us in this room can benefit from?
I believe your question is, given society's, I guess sometimes judgmental stance on mental illness, of which I think all of us have either some experience with ourselves or experience with other people, how do we get the message out that cannabis is helpful to mental illness? I really think that, and I think Courtney can really speak to this as well, I think, you know, with PTSD, we are usually familiar with the coverage of veterans coming back from the very many wars that we're sending to, not having a support network when they come back, and a lot of them being really classically what you describe as shell-shocked. I think that's done a lot to break the door open. We have a lot of work to do. For example, I don't see as many campaigns, although there have been lots of coverage in mainstream cultural magazines regarding domestic abuse and you know, various effects on people who may have schizophrenia. You know, we have a lot of work to do in regard to explaining the science to people, with the freeing of our ability to conduct science, although thank goodness for Israel in that regard. I think we're well on our way, but I do think there's a great amount of work left to be done, for sure.
Thank you. One thing that I will touch on regarding this subject is I'm finding that one way in order to push through that stigmatism is how we are modeling ourselves as medical cannabis patients and interacting with our community at large, identifying and connecting with people that are outside of the medical cannabis community, and showing that we are peers. We are not necessarily the classical, stereotypical 60 stoner. We're actually peers, and so not only modeling that behavior of we may have a mental health diagnosis, however, we are conscious on how to be right in our mind, and educating our community around us what a medical cannabis patient experiences, how they live their life that is not so far out of the norm, and hopefully we plant seeds that then they take into their community and it continues to grow and grow.
Next question.
Regarding the THCV, is there any strains that you can recommend that we have a very small percentage of? Something more like we have.
So we're being asked what strains have THC in it.
Yeah.
Up to now, the only strains that you could get were from South Africa, the classic being Durban poison. It's about 0.5% THCV. Interestingly enough, because of the way THCV affects THC, even in that plant, when you smoke it, you can tell the difference. Even that small amount is pretty amazing. About 5 years ago, a unique strain came online called Pineapple Purps. It had about a 3-to-1 ratio, so for every 3 parts THC, it had 1 part THCV in it. 2 years ago, we got a new plant, the one I was showing you the container of. Doug's Barron, the man who created his name is Doug. He gave it to me and a couple of people for control purposes to get out there. Our hope is that in the next year to year and a half, we'll actually have that out there. We had a similar problem where 2 years ago, most of you didn't even know what CBD was, and you certainly couldn't find high CBD strains. And so I have 3 horticulturists who work with me. We located the finest phenotype of ACDC we could, and about a year and a half ago, we flooded the market with 200 clones we just sent all up to California and Oregon. And what I'm seeing today is suddenly I'm actually seeing ACDC in the form of even smokable concentrates, so and in capsules. So I'm hoping that we can accomplish the same thing with this particular strain. And then, of course, once we do get it out there, once we have it stabilized, we know we've got a solid bedrock foundation for it. I'm sure what will happen next is we're going to get a lot of growers out there going to hybridize it all sorts of crazy ways. 95% of those will be a waste of time, and a few of those are going to be amazing gems. And so that's where we go. But up to now, you're pretty much stuck with Durban poison. Although I know Pineapple Purps is getting ready to come back again. Unfortunately, when Oxfordam got slammed, the mother for that plant went away. We were able to preserve it by another means. And they're in the process of curing that one up again now.
Thank you for referencing the 60% PTSD in Israel. That's a revelation. I would assume in Palestine it's probably 99% or in the refugee camps.
I think we all are.
Is there any work being done to get that information out there? Even about the
Sadly, Israel has done a lot of brilliant medical work, not just with THCV. And they've done it with cannabis in a lot of areas and things. They don't share nice. Okay, I'm just being honest here. I mean, for a scientist, we get to read the papers. And there's an amazing number of them. I know that I'm guessing that the high THCV strains have been reported, I think been reported at GW. Probably originally came from them working with Israelis, would be my guess. We now have people working in places like Italy that are producing a strain, for instance, of hops, or not hops, hemp, that has none of the enzymes for making the other cannabinoids. So all it produces is the CBGA, which is even more critically important. We have even less of it. It grows brain cells. Okay, understand, scientifically, in the history of mankind, up until recently, we've never had a true neurogenic compound. We now have 2 of them. One is a cannabinoid called cannabigerol, and there's another cannabinoid called cannabichromine, which was just documented 6 months ago in the research. Unfortunately, both of those are only available in teeny-weeny amounts. Luckily, we have folks like the Italians sitting there with their hemp, coming up with things that like this one South Italian strain that's 94% CBG being used.
Yeah, one last question. By the way, the fancy science room, a word, I think that means it's the only plant that grows brain cells. So the only plant on the planet that will...
That's not actually true because there are cannabinoids in other plants, most people don't know that. And those scientists don't
Cannabis
know
grows
that.
brain
There's
cells.
at least 12 documented plants that have CBD in them. If they have CBD, it means it has to have CBG to make the CBD.
Last question.
Yes, I read a recent article where they were psychiatrists where they said that there's a genetic link to schizophrenia and
Okay, Jeremy, I'm going to let you take this one because I know, it's the final question, and I'm sure you know a lot about
is there
this.
any truth or is this just it's another development?
So the question is about a psychiatrist journal about a supposed genetic link between schizophrenia and cannabis use. I'm going to have to defer all scientific questions to the expert next to me, but I can say as a historian, my first book, Weed the People, and here I'm also really embarrassed because right in front of me is, again, a better expert on the history of cannabis than myself. But let me speak as a historian and say that the lie about cannabis use and mental illness goes back centuries, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So I'll refer to the expert next to me on the current state of research, but I'm highly suspicious.
Even cannabinoids can have ill side effects, right? I mean, THC toxicity is probably the best known. You eat an edible and it's way too much, you get horribly sick in a lot of ways, including acting little schizoid sometimes, right? So on a temporary basis, there is that potential. But we also know that low doses can actually reduce schizophrenia. And we know that now that we're looking at THCV, we can block it entirely, is the possibility. They have to run more tests on that, but they're already looking at that. So it is possible. It's just unlikely in most scenarios that it could do that, but there's always that possibility. There's a possibility, there's a very few people out there who are actually allergic to cannabinoids. It's very rare, but it does happen. Okay? As far as a whole conclave of psychiatrists getting together and deciding that's how it is, I think you need to look at their research a little more carefully.
Just, I think last week, Harvard did a study on this, and their study came up that it actually goes the other way. That as it turns out, people with schizophrenia are drawn to cannabis, and it's not people who smoke cannabis and then they develop schizophrenia. So that is, so that's we both saw the article, so there you go. So that's the latest study just hot off the presses. So it might be the other way around. So, it definitely came out of Harvard. So thank you everyone for coming to the panel. We appreciate it. We hope you learned a lot and had some fun.